Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.
Greg, welcome. Great to have you with us on the show today.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.
It's interesting. I was talking with Dave O'Brien, who does the Red Sox, because he did the tournament in Orlando. I did. Dave's a great pro. And I says, "Hey, how things going up with the Sox right now?" He says, "Steve, he says, I don't know. I haven't made a single move yet." So the Phillies did make a move, and they re-signed Aaron Nola. Going into it, what did you think their odds were of getting him to stay? As much as we know he wanted to stay, but the market is the market. So, what did you think about how it played out?
Yeah, obviously there's no guarantee that Aaron was going to be back, but I do really think that both sides genuinely wanted to make it happen. And when that's the case, as you know, Steve, in the world of sports, most times they can figure something out. The initial numbers, they were pretty far apart, but in the world of compromise, they were able to find a number that worked for both sides. Knowing Aaron the way that I do, and I've known him for years and years, I knew his heart was here. And if there was anything he could do to stay, he would do that. And I also talked to Dave Dombrowski once a week during the season, and I knew how important it was to the organization to try and get Aaron back. So I was just happy that both sides kind of were able to look across the table at one another, decide that they both wanted to be part of this organization and have him part of the organization and make a compromise. And that's the best way negotiations can work, and it's great to have him back in the fold.
And not only that, but it was how quickly it happened. There was no prolonged wait for this, and that tells me a lot about both sides and how committed they were to each other. Is that a fair assessment on my part?
I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly what happened. They both looked at each other and said, look, we both want this to happen. What's it going to take? Boom, 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 boom. They get to it, and it's a done deal. So, yeah, I do think it says a lot about Aaron and his family, and it says a lot about the Phillies organization as well.
All right, so now here's the next part. Last year, I think everybody felt going into it, if they could come up with a shortstop and move Bryson Stott over, boy, that would really help. And they signed Trey Turner. What do you see as the short-term and long-term needs of the Phillies based on how it played out this year?
Well, I think, and you could probably say this about almost every organization in baseball, certainly a little more depth at the starting pitching situation would be great. Whether or not they can find somebody else, whether or not it's Yamamoto or another free agent that's out there that they think can help. I mean, this Phillies starting staff is pretty darn good. It's one of the best in baseball. But as we saw, you can never have enough pitching depth. So if they could add someone in that role, I think that would go a long way. And honestly, when it was all said and done, the biggest failure in the last, week of the season was their inability to get on base and score some runs. So maybe an on-base kind of guy they could insert in the lineup. The problem is, as you know, Steve, is there's not really a roster, well, not so much a roster spot, there's not really a position open to allow them to go out and, last year shortstop was going to be open. So they went out and got what they believed was the best shortstop in all of baseball. Right. This year, every position is pretty much locked in and full. So there would have to be some kind of moves that would have went along with it. I don't think that's going to happen. It's certainly possible. Anything can happen. And Dave Dombrowski sees an opportunity to make the team better, and it involves a trade. I think he would pull the trigger in a heartbeat. But I think it's a lot more difficult this year to kind of fill that particular role just because there's no vacancy to be filled.
I think that, you are who you are. I mean, Rojas is still the same player I saw when he played at Williamsport. All right, still the same player, and that's not a knock, but it's just a way he plays. I always feel like if they adapted a little bit to him, let him bunt a little bit, let him use his speed a little bit, he could be that on base guy in the number 9 hole if they limited the swings and misses.
I think that's a fair statement. Here's what I think. we're going to see this spring training when we arrive down in Clearwater in February. I think we're going to see Johan Rojas bunting 1,000 times over the course of the spring. And I'm not really exaggerating.
Right.
They need him to do that. And I don't think he was very good at it when he first came up to the big leagues. And for whatever reason, that was not part of his game, or at least not a part of his game that anyone was really focusing on. And if he's going to be a big league player and an everyday player, that is what he's going to need to do. So I think we're going to see them spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out how he can get on base. And because if he can get on base, he certainly can do what they need to do. And so, yeah, I agree. It has to be part of his game, the kind of player that he is.
Because defensively, he is a gem. I mean, defensively, incredible what he does. I mean, it's not just the speed; it's the routes he takes. He understands how to play really good defense.
Yeah. You just have to watch him once or twice to see that, and we saw that very quickly in Philly.
You talked about starting pitching, which was a great answer. Why is it, when we get to that 5 spot, that we see more bullpen games now and people aren't developing a 5th starter, even a 4th starter on some organizations? Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because they can eat up some innings so you have a fresher bullpen. At least that's my thought. What's yours?
I'm in lockstep with you. The question is a great one. The answer is a head-scratcher. I don't know why they're not. In the world of load management and getting these guys and getting bullpens into games quicker and all of that, it has seemed to go by the wayside. The need for 5 quality starters to try and give you 6-7 innings every night. And I do think we're seeing the results of that, late in the season. We're seeing guys burn out. We're seeing guys tired, and we're seeing bullpen games upon bullpen games. I mean, can you imagine 25 years ago a bullpen game in the World Series? It just you couldn't even fathom it. And here we are. It's a regular thing now. Here's what I hope. I hope it's starting to come back the other way. I mean, as you know, as we were waiting to find out where Aaron Nola was going to be, every pundit, every baseball man and woman that you spoke to said, well, the great thing about Aaron Nola is he gives you innings. He constantly shows up every 5 days, and he gives you – well, okay, because he's trained his body that way. So perhaps it has to start in the minor leagues. It can't start in the big leagues. It has to start when these kids are 18, 19, 20 years old. And if there's an emphasis to get that back into baseball, it can happen. It might take a couple of years, but I'd like to think that smart organizations are thinking about that.
Yeah, Glavine, Maddox, and Smoltz weren't missing a lot of starts.
No.
Ask yourself why. There's something that they were doing that needs to be now, obviously, they're exceptional athletes and well-trained, but still. Now we've had an entire year with the rules, right? So now we can at least evaluate, nearly 200 games worth of between the playoffs, spring training, and so forth, about 200 games worth. What do you think?
For the most part, I like them. I think the pitch clock had its intended. The result was what was intended, and that was to make the games go quicker and be a little bit more interesting. I mean, for a guy that watches 162 a year, there were days in 2016 and 2017 and 20 where you're like, oh my goodness, is this game ever going to end? And I'm a baseball guy. I love it.
Yeah, right.
But let's be honest, it was getting boring. And I think Major League Baseball, despite all the pushback they got from players, and they're still getting that, they saw a need and they did that. And I applaud them for that. I know it's not the purest form of the game with the clock. However, it's the same game that we watched when we were younger. So to me, they didn't really change it. They're forcing it back to the way it used to be. So I love that. The shift rule, I love. I thought it would have a bigger impact, to be quite honest. I thought left-handed hitters were going to see their batting averages jump 20, 25 points, but we didn't really see that. But what we did see is more action, more ground balls getting through, more base runners, that kind of thing. And in terms of the bases, and that one to me is kind of whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone out there could tell me that it had an effect somehow, some way, but I'm not exactly sure about that. So
yeah, I'm not sure either because I saw guys getting thrown out, and I also saw, I'm watching Arizona, 54 stolen bases, leads off with a broken bat single, doesn't move. Next game, leads off the game with an error to Turner, doesn't move. like at some point, I thought you stole 54 bases.
yeah, and that's because, well, a big part of that is because the Phillies still have a catcher that can throw base runners out.
JT.
And so if you have a JT Realmuto on your team, you kind of negate that, or at least you make them think a little bit more. So again, develop catchers that put some pride into playing defense the way JT Realmuto can, and maybe you're able to curtail that running game in that regard. And that's the way the game's designed. That's the way it should be.
You have some players where my toe hurts and I'm out for 2 months. Then you have Bryce Harper.
Yeah.
You're around him every day. In reality, how sore, not hurt, but how sore was he as the season went, because he was still coming off something incredibly major? And how much better can he be next season, because he will be almost a year and a half removed from it?
Yeah. Well, honestly, Steve, I'd be lying if I told you I have any direct knowledge, but much like you, I speculate and watch him go through his work each day and go about his business, and I think to myself, man, he's got to be hurting a little bit, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's just not natural to not feel the pain, but we didn't see it, and he certainly didn't talk about it, and he certainly didn't show it, and that's just a small part of what makes Bryce Harper so special. So the second part of your question, how much better can he be? To me, the sky's the limit, because he's a generational kind of talent that has a work ethic, much like the greats of all time in any sport. And when you put all that kind of thing, all that together, you just never know how great they're going to be. He's already great, but can he do more? That wouldn't shock me, wouldn't surprise me, and that's only good news for the Phils.
Castellanos had a great run at one point. Then at the end, he slumped. What do they need from him on a consistent basis, especially when the money's on the line?
Yeah, I think Nick being one of the players that kind of suffered from that this year, probably as much as anybody on the Phils. They really need all of their guys to be more selective. And I know it's so easy for me, sitting in the booth, to look down and say, well, I'd swing at that pitch, right?
Sure.
I wouldn't have even seen the pitch, and these guys are the best in the world, right? So I hate to knock them, but in the words of Dave Dombrowski, who is a lot better judge of what needs to happen, he says the same thing. They just need to relax a little bit and see the ball better than they were seeing it late in the season. And we saw each one of the guys kind of go through a spurt where they struggled. Nick's was late, and it cost the Phils. And, Kyle, no different. He's a guy that could swing and miss an awful lot, and Trey had his troubles early on. Yeah. So, up and down the lineup, they're all such dynamic players. They all can hit for power. But if they have a knock, it's their inability to stop the chase, and that's really what they're going to have to focus on this year. And I know for a fact that is exactly what they're going to try and focus on this year.
I have not asked you about the bullpen yet, and a lot of teams that win normally get that. It may not be the career year, but it's at worst their second best year out of like 3 or 4 guys in the bullpen. It's either a career year or their second best. And that's why there's such great turnover in it. What's your confidence level in the Phillies bullpen and the depth of it moving forward based on the guys you see?
My confidence level's pretty high. And yeah. I would agree with your premise, though. You kind of just never know with a bullpen. I mean, 2 years ago we watched Sir Anthony kind of dominate almost any time he took the mound. And then last year he certainly did not. Do I think Sir Anthony Dominguez can bounce back and be a dominant reliever again? Absolutely. He certainly has the stuff. So,
that's right.
If they get another year out of Sir Anthony that we've seen in the past, they're going to be better in that regard. Alvarado is another example of a guy that, was hit and miss when he was in Tampa and has been, pretty darn good here in Philadelphia. So,
no doubt.
The bullpen pieces, you just hope that you get guys having career-type years in the bullpen. And I know, again, Dombrowski's thought process with the bullpen and how important he believes it to be, and we've seen that since he's taken over, just how much better that bullpen has gotten. He has a knack for keeping a bullpen strong. So I think he'll make some tweaks back there. They've got a lot of young, hard-throwing, talented guys back there. In fact, they have a plethora of them. They have probably more than they need in the system. So that's what you want, because if one guy's not going, you can switch him out, bring someone else in, and hope that he gets going. So my confidence level is pretty high that the Phillies bullpen will be among the National League's best once again.
Well, my confidence level is pretty high. You're always going to give us great talk, things to discuss, so I always appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun. It won't be too long. Hard to believe.
Well, it won't be too long, although, I was out there with a huge parka on yesterday, so, so I hope it gets here soon. And I was in Orlando last week, so what the heck?
Oh, geez. Well, that's not good. Hopefully come February, it's a little bit more temperate down there, and we'll be ready to go.
Greg, always a pleasure. Thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate you and all the great work you do.
Well, thanks, Dave. Always good to talk to you. Anytime.
Greg Murphy joining us, Phillies Network.